So, in part one of the video, I covered the basics of Python programming, and we went through how to print. We went through how to print, text to the screen using what we call subprograms. We learned how to get the user to add their own input through the input subprogram. We learned about how we call subprograms and how we use them with variables that store our information, and we assign those values to variables. And we learned about the editor itself and how we utilize that. So that allowed us to cover the first 6 keywords, and then we did get through the second 6. And I do imagine it is not going to be that easy to remember everything all at once. I'm not expecting anyone to. One of the great ways that we do learn is through repetition. So it's more a matter of let's keep going through it until you get better at it. If you didn't watch the first video or you didn't complete this task, write down the keywords on these lists. It is a good idea to separate them into the 3 groups. I recommend Google Chrome, but you can just use Notepad or any other text software. That part doesn't really matter as much. You can even write it on paper if you want. The idea is have each of these written down with space next to them to add your own definitions. If you want, especially if you're watching this at home, pause the video and see if you can define each of these yourself based on what you remember from the previous tasks. We didn't reach group 3, so don't worry about defining those, but if you're aware of any of them, then go for it. We did cover string and concatenation a little bit. Okay, I'm going to assume you paused the video, you had a chance to write this all down. Now we're going to continue. Strings, and in this case, I've got this sample up on the screen. Strings, like we said last time, is exact text. It is a series of characters that can be numbers or letters. I say a series because it is generally more than one. We don't use it much, especially in Python, but a character is a single character, such as M or L. And it only takes up essentially, I think it's like maybe not a bit, I think it might take a byte, I'm not sure. But it takes like the smallest amount of memory. As soon as you add more than one character together, it becomes a string. And the amount of memory it can consume increases quite substantially because we don't store them as like individual characters, we store it as an entirely new data type. And then it grows in accordance to how much you store in there. It's still relatively small, but keep in mind that because strings include numbers, but they are not numbers, it can get very confusing. It's probably one of the most difficult, even for senior programmers, to even explain. Once you understand it, it's very simple. But for a beginner, it can be a little bit confusing when we talk about strings, when we talk about numbers. So what I'd like you to have a think about is what would be printed onto the screen if we were to write this code. Keep in mind, name equals Mr. Morrison and hobby equals programming. We talked previously about the phrase concatenation. Concatenation is when you add strings together. Unlike with values, you do not add them and get a whole value. Like if you add 5 and 5, that's a calculation, and the answer should be 10. But if you concatenate 5 and 5, the answer is 55. It's like that old trick when people say what's 1 plus 1, and you say 2. Well, I say actually it's 11. It's because you're concatenating instead of actually adding them. Same terminology if we just say plus, but concatenation is how we can distinguish the 2 processes, and it is important because computers need you to distinguish it. They need you to be exact with what you want them to do. If you say concatenate when you mean calculate, it will give you the wrong answer. Whereas a human would be able to figure out what you meant. So when I say print hello concatenation, again, what did you think would print out? I'm hoping that you came up to the conclusion it would say Mr. Morrison likes to do programming. It will take the name and then add that to the literal string that I put in, and then it will take hobby, the variable, which is another literal string, and it will just add those 3 together. There are several instances where we need to be able to do that, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring that up and demonstrate. In this case, I'm going to create another new file because it's easier to demonstrate that way. Name equals hobby equals programming, and concatenation equals name likes to do and hobby. Keep in mind, you can add strings together using plus or using comma. The biggest difference, this unit 2. Mr. Morrison likes to do programming. So you see is it's added brackets, and it's added these like speech marks on the individual phrases. It hasn't quite given us the exact expected result. Meanwhile, if I do plus, it's done it properly. But now it doesn't have spaces. So when you use a comma, it adds spaces automatically, but it also treats them like individual phrases. If you want to do concatenation, well, you need to use the plus symbol. Comma is a separate type of concatenation. It's similar, but because it adds extra steps, it means that you might not get the result you actually wanted. You have to manually add your spaces, but you ultimately get a phrase, Mr. Morrison likes to do programming. All right. Now, one of the reasons why we might do this, and it's funny, when I showed this to my first student, like the first class we covered this, they said, why would you do concatenation? Why wouldn't you just add one string with all of those phrases? A big part of that would be, let's say, response is going to be our variable. We're going to assign the input name plus what did you do today? And let's say I say something like plus hobby. I'm just throwing that in out there. And when I say stop and run to do today, Mr. Morrison, what do you like to do in programming? Oh, actually, sorry, I made a mistake. I tried to do this before. Let me see if it will do it now. Yeah, alright. So normally you can use a comma in order to add strings together, but if you try and do it with input, it will throw errors like this. Similarly, sometimes you're going to need to change the nature of what it is you're asking. Input doesn't like it when you try and do this inside the arguments for input. Print doesn't mind so much, but input doesn't like it. Which means when you're trying to do a complicated phrase here, it might be in your best interest to actually put the complicated phrase in a concatenation and then simply put that instead. And then I can still add things, so I can still do something like, is it true? And we have to use the plus, not the comma. And then I can say print, print that's awesome. Stop and go. Is it true? Mr. Morrison likes to do programming. Is it true Mr. Morrison likes to do programming? And I can be like, yes, that's awesome. So it just gives you an idea of like how we can play around with strings and how we can manipulate them. It's important to know how we use strings in this way because we've been focusing on strings so much, we haven't really looked at other things you can do with variables. So again, like before, what I would recommend is take a minute to pause this video and try this example at home. Get used to combining variables with subprograms and get used to using concatenation to manipulate the strings, and try and do different phrases. Try and do phrases that are meaningful to you. Don't put Mr. Morrison, put your own name, put your own hobby. Maybe add different types of responses. But it's just good practice to get used to doing that. And then we'll continue with the next part of the exercise. So I'm going to assume you paused the video, you went through the examples, and you've had a look at what we were talking about. So now I'm going to move on to the next phase. I also hope, even though I forgot to mention it, that you took a moment to take a look at the keywords and see if there's any that you understand and that you could add your own definitions to. The part that we want to look at now is numbers, and we want to look at how we do calculations. So I'll keep our old phrase. No, actually, I'm going to get rid of all of this because it is distracting. As much as it's not too hard to remember, I don't want to have that extra distraction on the screen when we have already have a lot to cover. So, talking about our naming conventions, I'm going to say days, and I'm going to say equals 11, and I'm going to say hours, and I'm going to say equals 2.5. The thing about Python, which is slightly different to most other programming languages, is it will automatically assign different data types to different variables. So it's not enough that our variables are like boxes or like containers that hold information. They also need to know what type of information they've been holding. Up until now, we've always used strings, which means we were using speech marks and we had the word 11. Now, without the speech marks, it is taking the literal value 11. This is important because now, if we do something like, and I'm going to say concatenation equals days plus hours, and I say print concatenation, we get 13.5. Now, it might have been better if I demonstrated it the other way around first, because if I put both of these as strings, instead we get 112.5 because it's literally added 11 plus 2.5. When we use strings and we add them, it's called concatenation. When we use numbers, it's called calculation. What you can do when you calculate, which you can't do when you are concatenating. So again, my keyboard layout is messed up, so I have to guess where things are. Is you can do things like times, divide, and minus, which but with concatenation you can only do plus. So here we get 27.5. Right? Pretty straightforward. Now, if we wanted to play with that, we could say something like spent. We could say, yeah, spent at space plus. We're going to see what happens here in a moment. Plus hours programming. And we get an error. I want you to think for a second, why do you think we've got an error? Remember, it will try and tell us what the problem is. So I'll give you, like, you can pause the video if you want to just have a think and take a look at the screen. So I want to draw your attention to the error that comes up, type error. And it's saying can only concatenate str, which is short for string, not float. Now, keep in mind, even though our first value was a whole number, therefore an integer, and our second value was a floating point variable, 2.5, when we calculated them, the system automatically recognized that we used a float and therefore upgraded our data type to a float. Integer boxes, containers, are smaller. They don't need to hold as large values. When we're talking about computer memory here, an integer requires a great deal less space. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't sound like a lot, but an integer, let's say storing an integer were to take 5 bits, storing a float would take as many as 5,000, depending on how many points you can have. So I don't know off the top of my head, but let's say, for example, that's accepted. I think that's accepted. Eventually, it no longer counts as a float, and it becomes what they call a long, because we very rarely use values that are this long. We store them using a float because float is enough to work with. But once the number of points, the numbers to the right of the decimal get too large, it becomes a long. This is a little bit of off topic, a little bit of a rabbit hole, so I don't want to go too far in that direction. I just wanted you to understand that we want to use the data type most appropriate for the type of work that we're doing. If we use integers, then we save memory. But if we need to use float, we will use float. Python will automatically upgrade to a float. What it can't do is automatically change to a string. So because spent is a string, a literal string, because we put speech marks, and calculation is a float, it's saying we can't concatenate those. It doesn't work. So either A, we can do this and go back to using commas. And if we stop and hit start, spent 27.5 hours programming. That's fine, that's acceptable. But there is another solution, and that would be casting. I hope I'm not jumping ahead when I say this, but casting, you could argue, is a kind of subprogram where we forcefully convert one type of data to another by letting the program know that's what we want to do. So in this case, I can say str, short for string, and then put calculation in brackets. And what will happen is it will treat this as a literal string instead of as a number. Keep in mind, by doing so, it works, but I will no longer be able to perform calculations on this because it is, while in this state, a string. So if you need to display the value of a string, so I can do the opposite. I think if I say days is now a string, I can do the opposite here and say int, and that will still work. But if I took away the casting of int, it throws an error because we can't multiply a string and a float. So by controlling data types manually in this way, it allows us to perform more complicated tasks. So when we input data, it inputs as a string. Therefore, we might have to forcefully cast it as an integer. But if days was something like 11 HP, that will cause a problem. Because even though I've told it to treat it like an integer, H and P are not numbers. The program will fail. So if you're going to use casting, make sure the string is in fact only numbers. And again, if I use 2.5, I would have to say float, not string, because it won't automatically do that for me. So, with that said, I would say this is another good point in which we can stop, and I'd like you to reproduce this task in your own editor. Have a think about whether you want to use an integer or cast it, or use a string and cast it as an integer. Do you want to concatenate or do you want to use commas? Do you want to change what it says, the number of days, the number of hours, how it's phrased? The tricky part is once you start changing things, if it stops working, it's because you haven't fully grasped something yet. And I say that because everyone makes mistakes, but what will happen is while you're copying what I've done, the mistakes are going to be easy to find. As soon as you deviate from my example, and if you can't figure out what you've done wrong, it's because something you haven't quite grasped yet. And I would like to know what that is, because I would need to know at what point did I lose you. So if you try this at home and you find you get stuck, even if it's only temporarily, put it in the comments, send me a message so I know, okay, maybe I was making that a bit too complicated. Maybe I covered too much at once and then it just kind of got lost in translation. So again, I would say if once you've done the task, think about the keywords that we covered as well, and write up anything that you think you now grasp of those definitions. So yeah, I'll give a moment for you to pause. And now I'm going to assume that you have returned to me. And we're going to continue with what is essentially the last part of this. I just want to add some context. So normally I would have covered casting separately. I would have broken that up into two separate tasks. I ended up doing it all at once, which is why I'm a bit worried. Maybe it was a little bit too much. Maybe I overcomplicated things. Um, what I wanted to do is to make this easier for you to understand why we do this. So first, I'm going to get rid of the casting because we don't need that bit right now, and I'm going to keep this as it is because that's fine. Right now, we've got 11 days and 2.5 hours. That's what the programmer, have added, but that's not very useful for an application unless we just wanted to make a fairly excessive calculator. What would be better is if we could get the user to add their own information. So instead of me typing 11, I want to say input, and I can put a phrase. How many days did you spend doing your hobby? And add my own space. Now remember, when we use input, we put the arguments in to not because we need them, but because it lets the user know what input I'm waiting from them. This is all about good user design and user experience. Without that, they might get confused or they just might enter something at random. Also, sometimes people will hit enter by reflex, and they'll be able to tell that they've skipped a step because the text will like jump up a bit. So I'll store that under days, and then here I'm going to basically ask the same thing. So instead, I'm just going to copy and paste, and this time I'm going to say how many hours did you spend each day? And assuming they put in numbers only and not letters, this should work. Now, we will eventually get around to what happens if they put in the wrong values, because if they put in a character, there's essentially nothing you can do. Well, technically, there's still things you can do, but you would have some kind of a catch scenario that would tell them you've entered invalid text, please try again. But that's quite complicated. We're not going to try and touch that right now. So how many days did you spend doing your hobby? I'm going to stick with 11. How many each day? This time I'm going to say 3.5, and it's through an error. Can you guess why it threw an error? I want you to maybe pause the video and have a read and think about what is it that I missed, which has caused it to throw this error. And keep in mind what we've covered so far. I'm going to assume you took a moment. Remember, when we get errors, it will try and tell us where the issue is. It says the file name, it tells us the line to look at, and it's saying calculation equals days times hours. It doesn't like this. Why? Because type error, you can't multiply a sequence by non-int of type. str means string. It might be in our best interest to put that, actually, str. So I'm going to update my notes and add that in there. What happens here is whenever you do an input, it will assume the data you put in is a string. Regardless of what I want it to be, it will assume it's a string. And there's several ways to fix this. Simple, so that you can see it, is we're going to go back to our casting. Here, I'm going to say int. And here, I'm going to say float. And again, you can see why having a separate variable called calculation allows us to convert our strings into a float, and that's now permanently a float. I don't have to cast this multiple times. And then now I can print that here. If I didn't have all of this text, I could print it exactly how it was, but in order to concatenate it, I need to convert it back into a string. So you can see how this conversion can get complicated real fast, but it allows you to do more interesting things. So how many days did I spend doing my hobby? And again, I'm going to say 11. How many hours each day? 3.6. Spent 39.6 hours programming. Simples. So at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, try to update your previous solution with the more sophisticated version that we've just done, and think about how you can use casting. Maybe try different ways or different combinations, but for now, just copy it as you see it, and then just get a feel for how that's done. Okay, I'm going to assume that you paused the video and then you did that without, me just sitting here doing nothing. And I'm going to do one more thing before we move on. I'm going to go back and take our examples from earlier. So I'm going to add some space, and if you remember, we had our name and we had our hobby, Mr. Morrison and programming, and we didn't need the concatenation, but what we can do instead is now say days input. How many days did you spend doing? And what I'm going to do is put there plus. Yep. Sure to get rid of that bit. Hobby. We don't actually want hobby to be a capital big H. That was just like, I think it auto-corrected me at one point. Just because of naming conventions. It's just bad practice, not because it won't work. Hours. How many hours did you spend? And again, I can say, did you spend hobby each day? And then it will calculate that still, and then it will say, and I can put name plus spent plus calculation plus hours plus hobby. And the reason why this approach is now superior, assuming I didn't make any mistakes, how many days did you spend? Oh, right, I'm going to add one more thing. Sorry. Let's stop that. And hobby, we're going to change to input. What did you do over the holidays? Hobby equals, right, that should be fine. And I'm just going to add a question mark here. And now, what did you do over the holidays? I'm going to say, I went to Comic-Con and I was cosplaying. How many days did you spend cosplaying? And I'm going to put in 2, because there was only 2 of the days of the 3. And how many hours each day did you spend cosplaying? Give or take, I would say around 7. Mr. Morrison spent 14 hours cosplaying. So now I don't have to put in the manual programming. I can put that in however I like. This gives you the flexibility, and it allows, how to put it, this is essentially how really, really simple language AI works. Like, very many programmers will start doing their first applications more or less like this, having fake conversations with a computer, which will take input from you and then feed it back to you in a way that seems almost human. Large language models do this in a far more sophisticated way, but the principle is the same. One thing I'm going to change is this part here where I said, how many days did you spend doing your hobby? And what I'm going to do is, let's do plus, space, actually no space there, put space at the end. So then it just cleans up a little bit nicer. And now I'm going to put programming again. How many days did you spend doing programming? I'm going to say 15. And how many hours did you, I said speed instead of spend. How many hours did you speed programming each day? I generally spend at least 2.5 hours programming each day. Mr. Morrison spent 37.5 hours programming. See, you have a flexible program that you can use in like multiple ways. What I'm going to do is quickly correct what I said. How many days did you spend? Not spent. And yeah, and there we have it. We have a simple application that combines our use of variables, our use of concatenation, our use of um, input and print um, subprograms. We've used the int and float casting. We've done a calculation, and then we display our final result all the way at the end. So I do hope that that has essentially covered everything that we wanted to do, and it gives you a good idea of just that beginner level programming. So I'm going to stop this video here. I would say you can pause it now, give this a try yourself, see how you get on. I would even say see if you can even manipulate it, see if you can change things around and get different kinds of results, add different types of questions even. But I think we've essentially covered everything. I'm hoping that at this point you will be able to go through our keywords and you will have a definition or understanding of each of them, and you won't need any like further assistance um, from me, at least not this time. In our next video, I'm going to be covering Unit 3, which will take us to some of the more advanced features. That is where we really start understanding the power of programming. These are just the basics. You need to have this locked in. You need to really understand it before we can move on, because the next step starts to use all of these things in combination and in different sequences. And if you struggle with something like strings, or you struggle with understanding how to use calculations or casting, you're going to struggle when we start doing selection statements, which is, as I said, it's really where the power of programming starts to kick in. All right. So whether you paused it to try it for yourself or whether you just kept going, I'm going to wrap this up. If you like and you found this useful, please like the video, give me comments, let me know where you got stuck, let me know which parts were the most helpful, let me know if there's things that you think I should change, or if I went maybe a little bit too quickly. 30 minutes is pretty much what I was aiming for. I've gone over by like 2 or 3 minutes, but that's fine. And yeah, if you follow my account, you will get more videos like this in the future as I build this up and continue on this journey. So until next time, this is Apollo Cryptic of Creative Genius Games, signing out.